Schopenhauer's words don't land gently. They don't whisper. They strike. A steel fist straight to the gut of modern sensibilities. There's no softening, no apology. It is raw provocation carved into language. A sentence that cracks the polite mask of contemporary thinking, exposing the raw nerve underneath. For many, it reeks of venom, of deep-rooted misogyny. But long before Nietzsche would sharpen philosophy into a blade, Schopenhauer, the man who taught the world how to stare directly into the void, had already laid the groundwork for this brutal worldview. He was not interested in comforting lies. He wanted the truth, even if it tore through flesh and bone. And today, we walk into that storm. Welcome to the inner chamber of one of the darkest, most unflinching minds philosophy has ever produced. We are about to dissect Schopenhauer's infamous views on women, not to defend them, not to celebrate them, but to confront them. Because dismissing him as a misogynist is easy. Too easy. What takes courage is to ask, what did he actually mean? Why did he say it? And why, even today, do his words feel like they carry an uncomfortable echo of something real? This is not a pleasant journey. His ideas will cut you open. But if philosophy is the art of staring into the abyss, then Schopenhauer was the man who refused to look away. To understand why he spoke with such venom about women, we must first see the universe through his eyes. And what he saw was not a realm of order or divine harmony. It was chaos wrapped in the thin skin of beauty. Beneath everything, nature, humanity, desire, he saw a blind, mindless force. A will. One that doesn't think, doesn't care, doesn't stop. It only wants. Wants to exist. Wants to spread. Wants to repeat itself endlessly through birth, hunger, lust, pain, and death. Schopenhauer called it the will to live. And to him, we are its prisoners. Our ambitions, our passions, our so-called free choices, they're nothing but the strings this will pulls to keep the cycle running. You think you choose love, success, happiness? No. The will chooses through you. You're its pawn, its breeding ground, its disposable tool. And worst of all, Schopenhauer says, this endless game is nothing but suffering. Life, he writes, swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. When you crave something, you suffer for lacking it. When you finally get it, the pleasure evaporates, leaving only emptiness. So you crave again. Suffer again. Until death ends the whole pitiful dance. Happiness? A cruel joke. A mirage over an endless desert of pain. And from this brutal vision, Schopenhauer turns his eyes toward humanity, and here comes the dagger twist. To him, men and women are not equal versions of the same creature. They are two separate instruments forged by the will to serve its only purpose, survival. This is where his essay on women delivers the lines that have made generations recoil. He writes that women possess less rationality, are ruled by immediate instincts, lack a sense of justice, and excel in manipulation and deception. But here's the catch, he insists this is not hatred speaking. It's biology. It's metaphysics. To him, woman is the perfect soldier of the will to live. Everything about her, her instincts, her emotions, her cunning, exists for one primal mission: preserve the species at all costs. She lives in the present because she must. She is anchored to survival, to security, to the ruthless continuity of life itself. Her mind is tactical, grounded, and unrelenting. Philosophy? Abstract truth? Transcendence? These, Schopenhauer says, are luxuries for men, the biological rebels who sometimes betray the will by wasting energy on art, science, honor, or self-destruction. Man, at his peak, is a traitor to nature. Woman is its loyal general. This is why Schopenhauer speaks with such ice in his veins. He sees woman as the purest embodiment of life's trap, the chains of desire, reproduction, routine, and domesticity. Man may occasionally transcend the will, paint a symphony, die for an idea, build a cathedral to nothing but madness. But woman, in his eyes, never rebels. She serves life. Always. And then comes love. Romantic love, Schopenhauer writes, is nature's most sadistic trick. When a man falls passionately in love, he thinks it's destiny, soulmates, cosmic poetry. But he is being played. Played by the will itself. The butterflies, the obsession, the sleepless nights, they are bait. Bait to drive him into reproduction. Because once the will gets what it wants, children, the passion evaporates. The man looks around one day and realizes the fire has turned to duty, to routine, to the cold machinery of family life. The trap has closed. Schopenhauer claims women know this instinctively. Their charm, their seduction, even their tenderness, he sees all of it as biological warfare, a strategy to capture the best protector and provider. A woman who marries for love, he says, is securing resources. A man who marries for love is securing his own cage. Cruel? Yes. Offensive? Absolutely. But before you dismiss him, ask yourself, haven't you seen it? In your friends, your family, maybe even in your own life? Men burning their youth, their money, their ambitions in the fires of passion, only to end up serving a life of routine survival? Schopenhauer takes that private disillusionment and turns it into philosophy. He names the trap. He writes the manual for it. And he does it with a venom that feels almost personal. And it was personal. Because behind all this cold logic stands a boy who grew up under the shadow of one woman, his mother, Johanna Schopenhauer. Brilliant. Charismatic. Acclaimed novelist. Host of Germany's most glittering intellectual salons. But to Arthur, she was ice. Distant. Unreachable. Their relationship was war, letters dripping with contempt and rage. She saw him as bitter, arrogant, insufferable. He saw her as vain, shallow, manipulative. So when he writes that women lack depth, chase vanity, live in performance, one can almost hear Johanna's footsteps behind every sentence. His philosophy wasn't born in libraries alone. It was hammered in the fires of rejection, of maternal coldness, of a boy who turned pain into theory so he could believe his suffering wasn't private, it was universal. Understanding this doesn't soften his words. It sharpens them. Because now we see the truth, Schopenhauer wasn't just dissecting women. He was dissecting life itself, and he hated what he found beating at its core. But Schopenhauer doesn't stop with love. No, love was just the bait. What comes after it, the slow death of passion, the suffocating march of routine, this is where he twists the knife. Because once the will wins, once you marry, reproduce, surrender, your life, he says, shrinks. The man who once dreamed, created, fought, and bled for ideals finds himself domesticated. Tamed. The raw energy that could have built cathedrals or symphonies is now rerouted into diapers, bills, and household arguments about furniture. To Schopenhauer, this is not an accident. It is victory. The will's victory. The man's wild, untamed spirit is broken under the silent weight of nature's oldest contract, reproduction first, everything else second. And this is why he writes with such venom about women, not because they invented this trap, but because they are its generals. The soft skin, the smile, the tenderness, the feigned fragility, it all hides the cold machinery of the will, using them as weapons to enslave men to life itself. He calls it the tragedy of desire. The more brilliant, ambitious, and powerful a man is, the harder he falls. Because the will doesn't waste its best bait on ordinary prey. It dangles the most intoxicating love in front of the men who might otherwise escape, philosophers, artists, dreamers, and drags them back into the mud of existence. And here, Schopenhauer becomes almost surgical. He dissects the very instincts driving attraction. A man thinks he falls in love with beauty, but he is actually obeying genetic math. Youth, health, symmetry, nature is calculating fertility, not romance. A woman thinks she chooses strength, status, intelligence, but she is bargaining for security, protection, survival during the long, vulnerable years of motherhood. What we call love is just biology wearing perfume. The poetry, the sonnets, the candlelight, it is camouflage for the oldest transaction in the world. And when that transaction is complete, when the species has what it came for, the romance dissolves like smoke, leaving two strangers bound by duty, finance, and habit. Schopenhauer watches this process with the cold smile of a man who has seen the trick too many times. For him, the entire drama of human love is a puppet show, the strings pulled by an ancient, merciless hand. But here is where his philosophy turns almost predatory itself. Because Schopenhauer doesn't simply want to describe the trap. He wants to strip away every illusion you have about life, love, women, and even yourself, until nothing is left but the brutal machinery underneath. He says men waste their lives chasing pleasure, wealth, romance, thinking they are choosing freely. But they are slaves to instincts, to desire, to nature itself. You think you love because you want to? No. You love because the will commands it. You think you marry because you choose to? No. You marry because the will tricks you into handing over your freedom in exchange for a moment of passion that burns out the second the contract is signed. And women? To Schopenhauer, they are not villains. They are perfect agents of this biological empire, soldiers who don't even know they are soldiers. Their cunning, their charm, their emotional weapons, they are not calculated evil. They are nature's programming written into blood and bone. And this is the thought that makes his philosophy so merciless: no one is innocent. Not you. Not her. Not anyone. Because the will uses everyone. Man, woman, child, genius, idiot, it doesn't care. It only wants to live, to expand, to repeat itself forever, grinding individuals into dust while the species marches on. But Schopenhauer goes even darker. He says the will's greatest cruelty is that it gives you just enough pleasure, just enough beauty, just enough love to keep you playing the game, knowing it will strip it all away in time. The woman you worship fades. The children you sacrifice for grow up and leave. The marriage rots into arguments and boredom. And one day you look back and realize life was not a gift. It was a contract signed in chains. Schopenhauer says this: if life is a battlefield, then the will to live is the enemy general. It commands through desire, through instinct, through every pleasure that makes existence seem worth it. And as long as you obey those commands, fall in love, chase ambition, marry, reproduce, you are nothing but its soldier. You fight. You bleed. You die. And the will goes on, untouched, uncaring, using your children, your grandchildren, your entire bloodline as fresh recruits for the same meaningless war. So what is the escape? Schopenhauer gives an answer so brutal it feels like a betrayal of life itself. He says the only victory over the will is to deny it. Not to fight it. Not to negotiate with it. To starve it. To turn your back on the instincts, the desires, the passions that keep you enslaved. To strip life of its illusions, romance, glory, wealth, and refuse to play the game at all. He points to the saints, the monks, the ascetics who renounce marriage, ambition, pleasure itself. The men who look at life and simply say, no. Not with anger. Not with despair. But with the cold silence of someone who finally sees the trick for what it is. This is where his philosophy turns almost inhuman. Because for Schopenhauer, the highest wisdom is not to love life, not to celebrate it, but to reject it. He calls art, music, and philosophy brief moments of rebellion, glimpses of freedom where the will loses its grip. But the ultimate escape is even harsher, to kill desire itself. No desire. No romance. No illusions about happiness or success. A life stripped to its bone. A life lived in defiance of the very thing that created you. Because the will to live, he says, doesn't fear death. It feeds on it. What it fears is the man who refuses to breed, to chase pleasure, to play along. The man who denies life itself. And now his bitterness toward women comes full circle. Because if the will enslaves us through desire, then woman, the eternal symbol of reproduction, passion, and domestic life, is, for Schopenhauer, the embodiment of life's trap. She is the chain. The temptation. The soft hand dragging man back into the cycle he swore he would escape. The artist may dream of beauty, the philosopher may chase truth, the warrior may die for honor, but one moment of passion, one whisper in the dark, and the will has them all crawling back to the ancient game: survive, reproduce, obey. And this is why his words cut like glass. Because behind the misogyny, behind the cruelty, behind the cold contempt for romance and marriage, there is the scream of a man who saw life itself as a prison. And he wanted out. Schopenhauer leaves us with no easy hope. No soft landing. Only a choice: keep playing the game. Or turn, finally, and refuse to serve the will that has devoured billions before you.